Welcome to the WEI Tech Talk podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Murphy, Solutions Architect in the Cybersecurity practice here at WEI. Today, we're covering all things Zero Trust with the father of the term himself, John Kindervag. I'm very excited to have you here, John. I don't know if you knew me at the time, but we briefly crossed paths at Palo Alto Networks, where we worked together for a few years. So very nice to see you again. Welcome.
Hey, it's good to get reacquainted with you as well. And thanks for having me on your podcast. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks so much. So, John, I guess we can't assume everyone knows who you are. I think everyone does, but you pointed out that I travel in a very small circle of nerds. So do you mind just introducing yourself very quickly and share what you're up to these days?
Yeah, I'm John Kindervag. I am the chief evangelist here at Illumio. And prior to that, I was at Palo Alto Networks, as Shawn graciously pointed out. And I'm best known as being the creator of the Zero Trust model of information security. So if you love Zero Trust, then I'm your guy. If you hate it, then you can. I make a good dartboard.
Very good. Well, thank you, John, for joining us. I guess I wanted to skip over the early days of when you created the term in 2010 and focus on where we are today, because it's been 14 years plus or minus since you coined the term, and a lot has changed in that time. We've got CISOs, Zero Trust Maturity Models in version 2. We've got technology vendors that have basically focused on the Zero Trust market or have rebranded or pivoted to Zero Trust, and yet enterprises continue to get breached. Do you have any thoughts about why that might be the case?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of misunderstandings about what Zero Trust is. I mean, people think it's a product that you can buy it. It's a process. It's something that you do. So that's the first thing. Secondly, the objective is designed to stop data breaches, but it means you have to know what you need to protect. And most people don't understand what they need to protect in their own organization. I get calls all the time from people. I bought product X, I bought product Y. What do I do with it? Well, I don't know. Well, how can you not know? You created this thing. Well, what are you trying to protect? What data do you have? What assets do you have? I haven't thought about that yet. Well, you put the cart before the proverbial horse. You have to know what you need to protect in order to protect it. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. Now, I will say there's a lot of companies who are doing it really, really well. They just don't particularly talk about it. There's no upside for them to yell at the top of their lungs that they're doing it. But we did see in 2021, the president of the United States issued the executive order mandating Zero Trust within all U.S. federal government agencies. That wasn't because he thought it was a cool term. It was because people were doing it inside the U.S. federal government and they were having success with it. And so those people wanted it to be more ubiquitously deployed. I also got to serve on the president's NSTAC, National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee, Subcommittee on Zero Trust in 2022, where we issued a report on what Zero Trust is. That's on the NIST website. So that's a great resource for people. I also am part of the Cloud Security Alliance, leading their Zero Trust efforts. So the CSA is the non-biased entity taking Zero Trust to the rest of the world, because as you mentioned, CISA, you have CISA and NIST in the United States talking about it, but that's very U.S. federal government focused, especially federal civilian agencies. It's even different than the DoD view of things. So you have multiple stakeholders involved here. But there is a lot of not only interest, but a lot of deployment in Zero Trust. Right before I came here, I was at a managed services company out of Europe, and we managed, over 100 Zero Trust environments. And in that entire time, we had one partially, not fully, partially successful ransomware attack that had no negative outcome to it. And in fact, the CIO was incredibly excited that it happened. He was like, this is the best news ever. And we said, how could this be great news? And he said, well, this is a company we acquired that's been refusing to adopt our zero trust best practices. So now I can show that had he done those best practices, this would never have happened, and forced him, the CIO of this entity, this I guess it's some sort of wholly owned subsidiary, to force them to do what we've been trying to entice them to do. And so we know that it works, and that's why I'm on a plane almost all the time, going back and forth across various oceans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it works, but it's tough to prove the negative. Like you said, if you're doing it well and you're not getting breached, it's hard to show that your zero trust initiative was the cause of that. So it's difficult to measure.
And that's an interesting thing, because I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a screenshot from somebody from some SIM tool or firewall log or something showing how a particular attack was stopped because they adopted that zero trust best practice. So it actually is demonstrable. You can see, like in our product from Illumio, you can see the stuff that's being rejected. You can see that this stuff is being stopped, that this connection is being rejected. And I have a saying that all bad things happen inside the allow rule. So if there's a negative thing that happens in an organization, you're not a random victim. You are at best an unwitting co-conspirator, because you had a rule in policy of some control that allowed that bad thing to happen. And this is true of ransomware all the time. Ransomware crosses security controls multiple times before it actually does its thing and encrypts all the data. There's the malware drop, there's the symmetric key exchange, there's typically the exfiltration of the data, and then there's the encryption. So 3 or 4 times there's a connection, or there's traffic telemetry between the command and control node and the malware itself, and you're just not doing anything to stop it. I tell people it's a bit like if I was sitting at my house. I live in Texas, for context. If I was sitting in my house and I'm watching TV, and I say to my wife, "Hey, honey, do you know the dude getting beer out of the fridge over there?" And she says, "No, I don't." And I would go, "Well, gee, I guess since he's able to get beer out of the fridge, then he must belong here. So can you go get some clean sheets out of the linen closet? I'm going to go upstairs and make up the guest room for him." That's what we do every single day, because we make the assumption that if you're there, you're supposed to be there, as opposed to the way we do it in Texas. No, you can't come in unless I explicitly allow you to come in. And if you try to come in without my explicit okay, that's a very bad day for you, right? I have controls that will, shall we say, terminate that TCP connection.
That's awesome. Well, you jumped to it a little sooner than I was anticipating, but my background is in security operations, threat hunting, and incident response. So I'm super passionate about zero trust because it takes a huge burden off of IR teams, because we used to chase these incidents constantly, and we looked like heroes when we cleaned them up. But I would like to not spend my weekends and holidays responding to massive breaches. So one of the questions I had teed up for you, and I kind of was inspired by the zero trust maturity model that CISA publishes, is what's the role of the SOC in a zero trust framework? Because a lot of people think of firewalls and microsegmentation tools like Illumio, but where does the SOC fit into that whole approach?
So if you go to the NSTAC report or any of the stuff that I've published, there's a 5-step model on how you build and deploy zero trust environments. So you first define the protect surface. You know what you need to protect, and the things you protect are called DAS elements: data, applications, assets, and services. Right. So the sensitive ones. So you put a single DAS element into a single protect surface, and you build out your zero trust environment, one protect surface at a time. This makes it incremental. You're doing it one at a time. It makes it iterative. You're doing it one after another, and it makes it non-disruptive. The most you can screw up is one protect surface at any given time. And then the second thing you do is map the transaction flows so you can see how the system works together as a system. Then the third step is you define the architecture. You put in the controls. We typically started with that, and that's why we failed, because we didn't know what we needed to protect. The fourth step is to create policy. I've already mentioned that policy is key, right? And if you have bad policy, all bad things happen inside an allow rule. But the fifth step is monitor and maintain. So we'll go into this here. So what Zero Trust does through the process is it creates a lot of telemetry, right? And that telemetry can be sent to a SIEM, a SOC, some other kind of tool. I think there's going to be more advanced tools coming out. But by doing that, we can re-inject it back into the system and make each part of it better and better and better over time. This is known as an anti-fragile system. And so I was inspired by the book Anti-Fragile by Taleb, where he talks about there are certain systems that you can make stronger under stress, right? He uses the human body. We're just, at the time of this recording, we're just coming off the holiday season, right? And I don't know about you, but I had a little bit too much candy and a little bit too many treats, and maybe I gained a couple of pounds. And so what do? Well, I have to stress out my body. I have to, lift weights. I have to run. I have to restrict calories. All of these things are stressors on my body, but my body doesn't collapse under the stress. My body adapts and gets stronger. This is known as anti-fragility. And we can make Zero Trust an anti-fragile system by doing that. And so you can then build into that and understand that that's where the real value of things like AI and ML are going to come in cybersecurity. Everybody else is worried kind of from a threat hunting perspective, and I used to do that a bit when I was young. I got tired of it, but I have a saying that all SOC analysts become colorblind over time, because all those red alerts turn green because you're so tired of chasing your tail, right? Yeah. And you don't have enough data to make a decision, and blah blah blah. But so everybody else is worried about, well, the attackers are going to use AI and ML to make even more sophisticated attacks that we can't find. And I disbelieve that. Why? One is there's no evidence, but two, there's boundaries, right? It's like a bowling alley, right? You go into the gutter. You can't bowl in somebody else's lane effectively. And so that's what TCP/IP is. We have a protocol that they have to stay within. And so we can take AI and ML and we can use it to have visibility, to find these things more easily, and to know what we need to protect. You see, one of the things from like the perspective that you're talking about, when I talk to people who've been doing Zero Trust well for a while, they'll be like me. They quit caring about what the attacks are. What's the latest threat? I used to follow that stuff religiously, and whenever Patch Tuesday came out, read all that stuff and read every new vuln that came out from CERT and all that kind of stuff. I don't know what's going on in that world anymore, because I don't need to know, because there's no rule in the environments that I design for an unknown resource on the public internet to come in and access a protect surface without any proper credentials and somebody knowing why they're doing it. And so those things just don't happen in real life, right? I mean, so the fact that we allow an unknown resource on the public internet to have access to our important data is the problem, and Zero Trust solves that problem.
Interesting. So you mentioned, going back to the anti-fragile concept, that the SOC plays this sort of feedback mechanism. Are they feeding back into the controls? Are they feeding back into policies? Or how do you see that working out best?
Yeah, they would feed back into all the other four steps anyway, right?
Yeah.
They would tell you, oh, you need to refine your protect surface a little bit better. Here's some things that you're missing. There's a couple of servers that should be in that protect surface because we're seeing now that they're part of that. We've got better transaction flows, all that kind of stuff. They would say, oh, here's we saw traffic coming in here, and should that be allowed or not? That doesn't seem right. There's something, that's not quite kosher here. And so for each of these 5 steps, they would do that. And you can use some sort of AI type of thing to do that. In fact, one of my early reports at Forrester was about creating a virtual SOC that did all of this stuff, and also wrote one called Rules of Engagement about how if you understood what you're allowed to do without a human intervention, then you can greatly reduce the burden, because we can't move fast enough, right? I used to have a speech where I talked about what happens if we tried to deploy an airbag the same way we do change control, right? We'd all be dead, because we're about to be in an accident. Let's call a airbag control meeting, right? We're just way too manual in our processes. So in the movie The Imitation Game, the character of Alan Turing, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, says something that was so profound. I mentioned it in almost every speech. He says, what if only machine can defeat another machine? And so that's what I'm all about building, is the machine that defeats the machine. The attackers are more automated than we are. They don't have any rules. I mean, think about it. Attackers don't have change control, right? Hey, Hacker Central, I just tried to hack, WEI, and it didn't work. When's my next hacking window? That stuff doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
But think about how go back to the Target data breach. When did that occur?
Years ago.
Well, years ago, but think about the time frame it occurred.
And it was after the zero trust concept had been out for a number of years. What is it, 2014?
Yeah, 2013 maybe. But yeah. I mean, the point I'm getting at, I probably shouldn't have, because if you're not up to speed and didn't know that question was coming, because you're supposed to be asking the questions, not me. But it happened over Black Friday weekend. Well, during Black Friday weekend, you go into lockdown mode, right? No changes are allowed.
Perfect time to attack, just like
right.
The holiday season. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's why they're going to attack then, because they know you're not going to be able to respond. So no one was able to respond because they were more worried about the revenue generated by Black Friday. But in fact, it cost them more to mitigate that attack than they received from the Black Friday revenues. And so you should never be in lockdown mode. And this CIA triangle, the mythical thing that we talk about, well, it's a I can't do it with that, but it's an isosceles triangle.
Yeah.
With a hypotenuse, a really long hypotenuse that says availability. And then nobody cares about the other two sides. All we care about is availability. And that's the problem, right? Yeah. So we have a lot of highly available yet compromised networks out there, where we just saw that an adversarial nation state is deep inside a couple of big companies and a couple of major departments of the United States. Those reports have come out, right? Well, why did those things happen? Because we just allow people to have access to things automatically, because we have a 20th century view of cybersecurity.
Yeah, and this goes to another one of my questions, which was around common pitfalls you see organizations run into when they're trying to go down the zero trust path. But you've sort of hinted at them. It's policy, it's rules, it's focusing on the product, not on the outcomes, not knowing your protect surfaces and the assets that you're trying to protect. Are there any other big pitfalls, distractions maybe that organizations see?
The biggest one is trying to do it all at once, right? So if you try to do it all at once, you will fail. You have to think. It's the same way you renovate a house. I just moved into a house that I renovated. for 9 months, right? And because I don't have 600 friends who can come over for a weekend and do a television show and renovate it all in 48 hours, it took 9 months to do it, right? You had the flooring guy in, and then the bathroom remodel guy, and then the this, and then the that, and then the that. And it's still kind of going on, but you do it iteratively, a little bit at a time. And when people try to do it all at once, they fail because they think they need to do it all at once. The second biggest problem is following too rigidly, like the pillar model of the NIST maturity model. I've written about this on CSA, but there was originally a Forrester maturity model that I created based upon the 5 steps. That works a whole lot better. You, instead of trying to have pillars, right, that you're building, and you got to get identity all done before you can move over to whatever the next one is. I can't even remember what sequence they come in, but that will always fail because you're always going to be at a low maturity because you can never get all the identity done in the entire organization. So I tell people, think about you're trying to freeze ice in an ice cube tray. If you just fill up one ice cube tray square, you can freeze that and get one ice cube, and you're done with that one ice cube. And then you put more water in, and then you get the second ice cube. And so you do it iteratively like that, and each ice cube being a protect surface. So you should do zero trust on a per protect surface basis, not on a per technology basis. Now, that's an unpopular thing to say because if you're an identity vendor, right, you want everybody to focus on identity and get that all done because you don't care about the other parts of the system. If you're a network security vendor, you want them to focus on the network pillar first because you don't care whether they get the identity done or anything else done, right? If you're a SIM vendor or whatever your vendor bias is, you want them to focus on that and disregard all the other stuff because that's how revenue happens. And I understand that. I work for a company. I happen to work for a microsegmentation company, and I personally believe microsegmentation is the foundation of zero trust from a technology standpoint, that you build your pillars on it, right? If you're building a house, you have to have a strong foundation before you build the pretty columns. And so, that's why I came to Illumio, is because I knew, and in fact, I said in 2010 in the second Zero Trust report, which was called Build Security into Your Network's DNA, and it defined Zero Trust network architecture. I said that new ways of segmenting must be created because all modern networks must be segmented by default. It is the segmentation that stops the malicious actor from getting access to the protect surface. The segment itself defines the micro perimeter for the protect surface.
Got it. And you sort of touched on my next question, which is about how to get started. You mentioned you need to know what you're trying to protect. That should be a place to start. Are there strategies for figuring out what you have? Because I work with a lot of organizations that are quite large or have grown through merger and acquisition, and they realize that they don't know what they're trying to protect. Are there good tools out there or good strategies for getting the zero trust journey started?
Well, I mean, let's face it, I'm not unbiased in this discussion. That's why I came to Illumio, right? Because I realized that by deploying microsegmentation, you get the visibility into what protect surfaces you have. You can see the transaction flows. You have the first technology control in place. You can begin to set policy, and then you just send it to a SIM or a Thor or your SOC or whatever. And so all 5 steps are kind of there in that kind of platform. So the first step you have to have is visibility. And however you get that, I have views of how it's best to get that, but however you get that, you need to do that. Now, in the NSTAC report, I don't know if it's in the NSTAC report, but I do talk about often the zero trust. What do I call that? Here I'm blanking on it because I've done it only 5,000 times in my entire career, and it's the learning curve. So there's a learning curve on where do you start, right? And so you determine typically, I work with a client and we determine what things should be your protect surfaces. So if you're a bank, you have your ATM system, you have your Swift environment, you have your main financial database, you have things like your DNS server. That's something that should be in there. You have multiple things, and then we put a relevance score to them to say how important are they, because not everything is of the same importance, right? And so, and then I tell people on your learning curve early on, start with things that are less important so you can learn how to do it. These are known as learning protect surfaces. So start with something that if you break it, it's no big deal. It's like street ball, no harm, no foul. You're not bleeding, we're not calling a foul. And then do a couple of protect surfaces that have a little more sensitive data, but still not mission critical. These are practice protect surfaces, because you're going to get to zero trust the same way you get to Carnegie Hall. Practice, practice, practice. And then after that, you'll focus on your crown jewels, your keys to your kingdom, your high value assets, whatever you call them in your organization. And by doing it in that way, you have the greatest chances of success with the least chances of disruption. And so that's generally how I suggest people do it.
That's fascinating. I would have never guessed that you start with your least important assets first, but it makes perfect sense to practice and get sharp on those before you bring down your DNS infrastructure, for example.
Right. Well, and this comes from experience when I thought early on, logically, you start with your most important things. And then I found out people didn't know how those things worked. And in fact, a lot of times it was impossible to start there because we had to figure out how they worked first. And so start with something that you know. And then and because everybody's so nervous because it's new, we've never done this before. This is not this is not how we normally do it. Okay, right. Of course it's not, but the way you're doing it isn't working. So you better figure that out. So figure out something that and if it breaks, you can't get in trouble for. There's certain systems that if it breaks, nobody cares. Half the people don't even know they're out there, right? So those are the little tips that will help you do it, because it's not hard to do. But if you don't have any experience doing it, it's like for my new house, I'm putting together, a lot of IKEA type furniture, right? And we've got a few of them that there's, like 3 bookcases. Well, that first bookcase is a nightmare, right? You're trying to figure out, geez, and that takes like 10 times longer than it should. But the second and third are easy because you've done it and you know how to do it. And so repetition is how you learn. And, when you want to not be learning in the middle of the fight.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be just recalling what you already learned so that you can solve the problems very, very quickly.
That makes sense. I wanted to pivot to Illumio and microsegmentation, and you don't need to give the product pitch. WEI does enough of that. We're big fans of your technology, but wanted to have a discussion, I guess, about how to implement the tool and what are some of the benefits of implementing the tool other than getting you started on your zero trust journey. And one concept I've talked a lot about, and actually it came up in the Cloud Security Alliance's training, which I just completed their zero trust certificate, and they talked a lot about blast radius. So that it sort of seems like a counterintuitive thing to talk about when you're talking zero trust, because the goal is prevention. You don't want them to get in the first place, and if you have good policies, they can't get in. But to go back to your example of a gentleman helping himself to a beer in your house, you want to kind of put circles around assets, so if they do get in, that you can prevent them from moving around your house and accessing other sensitive areas of the house, for example. So can you comment a little bit about how Illumio helps reduce blast radius, or maybe just your thoughts about blast radius in general?
Yeah, I've been talking about blast radius forever because I've been pointing out that because everybody, when I first started, everybody was like trying to figure out ways that they could say that zero trust wouldn't work, right?
Mm.
And okay, well, if I bring in the ubiquitous USB key into and I install that malware on the server because I'm a malicious insider, yeah, fine, because now that has to go outbound to a command and control server. There's no outbound rule that allows that to happen in zero trust,
Hmm.
right? Unlike the old trust model, right, from the old days, which is where you had uh, trust levels defined at each interface. You've installed firewalls like that that had different trust levels. When I was doing those installations, 20 odd years ago, I kept saying the trust level for every interface should be zero. That's where zero trust comes from. There shouldn't be
Hmm.
trust. Trust is a human emotion. It has no business being involved in technology and digital systems. So you put that USB key in and you get it going and the first thing it's going to do is try to call out to a command and control server. Okay, there's no rule that allows that to happen for an unknown piece of software to make a call to a command and control server. That outbound connection will be stopped. You've controlled the blast radius. Maybe a few things get popped theoretically inside of that protect surface, but they're all just talking to each other and they're not doing anything particularly malicious. So eventually, when you look at how malware works generally, and there's always outliers, but generally, malware has to have some way to talk to some sort of command and control server in order to know what to do, right?
Yep.
I mean, maybe somebody will define some autonomous malware, but it can move around a certain degree, but it also eventually has to get data back to a command and control server, or else there's no point in doing the hack other than maybe disruption, the disruption for a certain reason, like Stuxnet. I mean,
Yeah.
that was a disruption attack. But and by the way, if you're up against that kind of attack, you're kind of toast no matter what you do. But that attack probably cost $1 million to create, and it's not worth the time of the average attacker to attack the average corporate user because they aren't going to get that much money out of it. But so you're controlling that blast radius. You're just stopping that, and so maybe a few things get popped inside of a protect surface, but now you know what's happening because you're seeing that telemetry. There's this outbound connection that shouldn't happen, and it keeps trying to go out, and we're stopping it. We need to investigate that. Oh, there's a malware there. We clean it off and move on about our day.
Hmm.
Yeah, controlling the blast radius is super important, and to the point where the blast radius becomes so small that nobody gets blown up, right?
Yeah. And just to throw the sock back into the mix, so if I were to get engaged and find a server that had been owned by some malware, but command and control was stopped as it should be by our network controls, then I would want to do a root cause analysis. How did it get in there in the first place? And let's change our policy. Maybe we didn't have locks on the data center doors or what have you. Maybe we need two-factor authentication to get onto the box, and then we can update our policy so that we don't face that attack in the future. But to your
And
point,
and maybe you have malicious insiders there put there by a foreign nation state to to do corporate espionage, right? People don't
yeah,
think about that, but it might be a human resources problem, not a technology problem. Maybe you're hiring people who are there to steal stuff. I mean, this
yeah,
happened with the space shuttle.
yeah,
The space shuttle. There are people in prison from a foreign country who were hired by NASA, and then they stole all the plans to the space shuttle, and sent it to an adversarial foreign nation state, and they got caught, but it was too late. So a lot of times it's an HR problem and not a technology problem, but the technology can be used to solve the HR problem.
yeah, definitely. And I know today ransomware is kind of all the rage. That's what everyone focuses on. To your point about availability being the only thing most organizations care about. But when I started, we weren't ransomware wasn't a common technique, and the focus was APTs and
Sure.
espionage and insider threats. Do you think that the pendulum will swing back at some point, and we'll be facing those types of threats, and they'll be more serious, or do you think ransomware is here to stay as the top dog?
Ransomware exists because cybersecurity insurance exists. So if
Oh,
you go back to the history of insurance, life insurance, if you start researching that, you'll see that the early problem with life insurance was people were being murdered. It led to an absolute drastic increase in murders, uh, typically by women murdering their husbands with arsenic to get the money. So there's a lot of cases where, you know, a particular woman maybe went through 5 husbands and they all died mysteriously, and then somebody went, "Oh, what's going on?" And so then they went in and said, "Okay, well, we don't pay out for cases of murder, for example." I mean, there's various things. So, you know, one of the big questions today is, should you pay ransomware? And I had this discussion with federal, um, our federal field CTO, who's a former military officer and a former CIO of a federal agency. And his view is, no, you shouldn't pay ransomware. And my view is, uh, you shouldn't pay ransomware payments. And my view is, you probably will have to in the short term, but the problem is cyber insurance. Maybe the problem is we shouldn't have cyber insurance.
hmm.
Maybe cyber insurance is the root cause analysis of all this,
Yeah.
right?
Because sometimes they'll
Uh,
tell you, we know that your cyber insurance policy insures you for 15 million, so we're asking for 15 million.
That happens all the time. In fact, when I talk to people who investigate this, the first thing that's stolen is the cyber insurance policy.
Right.
And so you have people trying to get around that by having fake cyber insurance policies. But then the attackers find the real one because they go through the email server of the CEO and the CFO and all those kinds of things and find it, right? And then they know what it is. And so I have a friend who's a lawyer who specializes in negotiating these things on the dark web, and they always know how much it is. So it's just like, how much gold do you have in your secret vault in your bedroom at your house? Well, of course, if I know that, then I'm going to break into your house and steal that gold. And so you're just giving the malicious attackers, the cyber criminals, information that they can use to make money off of. And of course, they're going to do that. They're rational actors.
Hmm.
And maybe the problem is that we have cyber insurance. That's something that I don't think anybody else is saying. Maybe we should outlaw cyber insurance, because just because insurance works in the physical world doesn't mean it'll work in the digital world. Not everything can transfer over, right? And and it's certainly not rigorous. When I talk to insurers, they all say, well, we could always deny any claim we wanted to because their stuff is, their cybersecurity is so awful. But we're going to pay out X amount of claims to keep them paying premiums because we know where the break-even point is and where we make money. So as long as we're making money, we kind of don't care. It's a little bit of that kind of thing. And I recently had a board member call me up from a company, and he was on the risk committee, and he said, "Hey, I want to just run something by you. I just talked to our CIO, and I asked him about our cybersecurity posture, and he said it's great. Well, how do we know? Well, our cyber insurance premium went down. Well, what caused that to go down? Well, I have no idea. Did we do anything different? No. Okay, so we have no actual way of knowing what our cybersecurity posture is. We're just assuming that because the policy cost went down, that and he was flummoxed by that whole thing.
Hmm.
It was just like, that made no sense to him. And I said, it makes no sense to me either. If that's your metric, then you've already failed, you know. But
Hmm.
so maybe we should outlaw cyber insurance. Now we won't, because there's a lot of money to be made there, and the cyber insurers won't allow that to happen. I'm sure they have a lot of people on K Street lobbying for, less regulation and more cyber insurance, right?
Hmm. Well, they could outlaw using those funds to pay the threat actor, but still allow cyber insurance to help organizations pay for damages and recovery, and just that way
Yeah,
you're
but
not encouraging the problem.
yeah, okay, so I've got $10 million policy. I got to pay $10 million to them, but I say, well, I'm not using the
Uh,
money from the cyber insurance. I'm using this other money, and then from this other account, and then it goes into this other account, and then it gets transferred, and blah blah blah. You're still, if you get the money, and you paid the money, it's all the same money, right?
that's a
So
good
that
point. Yeah.
doesn't that makes no sense from an actual solving the problem perspective. Either it's legal to pay it or it's not legal to pay it.
Right.
And if it's not legal to pay it, then are you really going to enforce that and send companies into bankruptcy because of that?
Hmm.
There's an existential problem that someone else has to solve because it's a policy problem. But I personally think if you didn't have cyber insurance, then you wouldn't um, have this problem. And as
Fascinating.
a friend of mine who recently passed away, but a longtime cyber guru, CISO of several big banks, said to me, our business went downhill when the accountants got involved because they wanted to take everything that was involved in in financial risk management and the way we did financial stuff and transfer it over to cyber, and it just didn't work. The risk metrics don't work. That type of quantification doesn't work. Cyber insurance doesn't work. Insurance works in the physical world. It does not work in the digital world.
Interesting. That's a fascinating topic. Um, One last question before we wrap up here. I wanted to move to the future of zero trust and where you see all of this going. And I thought of both two trends, one being cloud and how that changes the protect surface and also changes our visibility. Um, and the other is, you've mentioned it a couple times, AI and where AI fits into all this. Do you want to just wrap for a minute about where you think all of this is headed?
Yeah, strategically, zero trust doesn't change. The strategy is decoupled from the technology, and it was done that way by default because I knew strategy shouldn't change, but the technology would get better and better over time. So that's one. Number two, zero trust doesn't care where the protect surface is located. It can
Mm,
be in a public cloud, private cloud, in a data center, on a physical server, on a virtual server, on an endpoint. It just doesn't care. Yeah, everything is designed to work uh, well in any environment. It just what we care because what we care about is data and assets, and those things wherever they're located, we can define a protect surface. We can map the transaction flows. We can architect the environment. The tools might be different in the different environments, but it's still architecture. We create policy. The policy is functionally an allow rule. We have a
mm,
default deny in zero trust, so we're going to turn on an allow rule. That's the policy. When is it appropriate to allow a particular user to get access to a particular resource? And then finally, monitor and maintain. Having all that telemetry so that we can review that visibility so we can make it better and better. All those things work just as well in a cloud as they do on a physical environment. Again, AI and ML, right? I think it's a great benefit to us. I worked at a managed service provider before coming here, and in our zero trust environments that we were protecting, we had no level 1 or level 2 SOC analysts. That was all built into the machine defeating the machine. So we were able to only have about one in every 100,000 events go to a human to be looked at. So it wasn't very manual at all. It was very streamlined because we were leveraging kind of a nascent version of AI and ML. And I know that it's more robust now than when I left, 2 years ago, or a little more than a year ago. So that's going to be a huge benefit to us, right? I mean, yeah, they're going to make more attacks that are more automated, that are more intelligent and more dynamic. and those are going to toast the people who are unwilling to adopt zero trust. And so, it's the old thing. I don't have to outrun the bear. I have to outrun you, right? And let the bear eat you. And so, as Richard Baitlick always talked about, the guy who coined the term APT, you're trying to create enough friction in your system so that the attacker will move on to a softer target, because they have an ROI typically, and they have to be able to get something that they can monetize or do something with. Maybe it's intellectual property, maybe they're trying to steal something for a larger thing, but they have to do it within a certain amount of time with a certain amount of effort, or they need to move on to a separate target. And as a friend of mine in the government said, attackers don't attack well-defended targets because there's so many soft targets out there. Why would you, right? And so, if you start building these kinds of environments and you become a well-defended environment, the attacker is going to move on because they're going to look at that and go, not worth my time. I'm going to go on to, because they have lists, databases of all these targets and what they think the value is and what type of thing they're going to steal. And when I've talked to people in, say, the FBI or Secret Service, when they do take down a cyber criminal ring, they'll find that. And the biggest problem that these people have is they don't have enough resources to attack all the people that they want to attack. Right. So you got to hope that you're down low in the list. And then when they get to you, they go, well, that's too tough. I'm going to move on to the house next door.
Right. So there's no perfection in zero trust. It's just do better than everyone else and continuous improvement.
Yeah, there's no perfection in anything, right? But never let the quest for perfection get in the way of greatness, right? I mean, you can do really amazing things with this, and I've seen it with my own eyes, and I've talked to people who've done this, and and I'm like, wow, those are things I never thought about. People are doing stuff using these principles, which are very simple, designed to be simple, to do amazing things. And that is really gratifying from my perspective.
Fascinating. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, John, for your time today. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure to speak to the father of zero trust. It's super exciting for me. Any closing remarks or thoughts before we wrap?
No, I mean, I'm just excited about our partnership, and those things are always fun. I like collaborating with people. This, cybersecurity has to be collaborative. No one knows everything, and everybody needs to be continuously curious and continuously learning. And it's a fun business to be in. So I wish everybody the best on their journey.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Just as a point of closing, you can learn more about WEI at WEI.com and Illumio at Illumio.com and the Zero Trust Hub. And also you can connect with myself and John on LinkedIn. Thank you very much for joining today.